The Hells Angels came to my uncle's funeral. What's the nicest thing you've seen a gang do? Story 1. My uncle rode hard throughout his life, and his biker buddies tearfully attended his funeral, teaching all of us a valuable life lesson. My mom had 4 older brothers. One I've only met once because he lives in Florida and that's halfway across the country. Growing up, the other 3 all lived in my hometown, and I saw 2 of them pretty regularly. The other uncle, Dewey, only came around when he really needed something. Dewey was a good old boy born into a family of staunch white-bread Catholics. Dewey was completely bald with a mustache-goatee combo that would make Jamie Hyneman jealous and mirrored sunglasses that never left his face. Dewey liked his smoking and his drinking and his hooking up and his motorcycle. Dewey and my grandfather, a World War II vet who drove himself to the hospital when he was having a heart attack because ambulances are too expensive and will wake up the neighbors, never got along. Dewey was a wild child, married by 21, kid by 23, divorced by 25. He soon joined up with a local band of bikers and rolled around the city. According to my mom, I was still young, looking for a good time. I distinctly remember him coming to Christmas and Thanksgiving parties, having a couple of beers and leaving because he had drinking to do. He never stuck around for food or festivities or church, just had a couple of cold ones, shot the crap with his sister for a bit, and rolled off into the night. I remember when he was diagnosed with cirrhosis. He spent a few weeks in the hospital, and I went and saw him one last time with my family. He still looked jovial. He was never a bad guy, always called me little dude and had a dirty joke to tell. And while my family beat around the bush when it came to his impending death, he gave me the best deathbed wish I'd ever heard. I don't want anyone to grieve for me after I've gone, he said. I've lived my life as full as I could. I had a damn good time every day of my life, and I regret nothing. Don't be sad that I've died. I want you all to party for me. We had a typical funeral, ironic, I know, but during the wake, we heard a tremendous commotion outside, like hundreds of bees landing in the parking lot. The door swung open and in walked 2 or 3 dozen hardcore bikers. Bandanas, Hells Angels vests, sunglasses, skulls on everything. Dirty leather chaps, long greasy hair, and smell of motor oil and whiskey. My conservative family fell silent and watched as these tough freaks walked up to his casket. And one at a time, they paid their respects. Some prayed, some cried, some talked to him, promising to ride again with him in the great beyond, and some stood quietly in reverie. They were devoted to their fallen brother and so incredibly respectful to my grandparents that you would have thought my grandfather was their drill instructor. They thanked him, told my grandmother they were sorry for her loss, and left as suddenly as they'd come, leaving only the vague scent of Jack in the air and a heavy, unspoken lesson about camaraderie in our hearts. Story 2. I ran the after-school program at an elementary school in a rough part of town. Our playground was actually a city park, which meant we couldn't do the maintenance on broken equipment, and I couldn't kick people out to make it safer for my kids. I'd had problems with some teen and 20-something creeps drinking and fondling their meth-head girlfriends while the kids were out playing, and god damn it, we didn't deserve to just stay inside because cops didn't patrol. My kids deserved to play. It was frustrating. But one day, a couple gnarly old gang members approached me while we were outside, which scared me, and asked if I'd been having trouble with the neighbors coming around. I told them that it had been pretty rough. One just clapped a hand on my back and said, "You ain't gonna have that no more. You ain't gonna have no trouble from us." The next day, a biker was by the basketball court keeping watch while the kids played and left when we were done. That continued every day for the rest of the school year. Also, the guys who stood watch never smoked or cussed while the kids were out there. I don't condone their activity, but I appreciated their help. Story 3. When I was younger, I lived in a relatively bad part of town. I am Asian and half white, and most of my neighbors were black or Hispanic. I started playing sports at school and made friends with a number of kids, including this one guy named Thaddeus, who was 2 years older than me. Thaddeus was a big, tough kid, but a secret that he kept from a lot of people was that he sang like an angel. He told me once and sang R. Kelly's "I Believe I Can Fly," and I've never heard it done better. I swore to him I would never tell a soul, and I never did. Thaddeus got involved in some gang activity later on, and I lost touch with him until high school. I was walking home late one night when I was approached by a group of black teenagers who apparently saw me as an easy mark. I wasn't sure whether I was just going to get mugged or was going to get an ass kicking out of it too. I think my membership on the football team was the only thing that saved me from an immediate beatdown, but it wasn't going to end well. Suddenly, I hear aloud, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Leave him alone." I look over. Thaddeus and a couple of older 20-plus guys are pushing into this circle. Thaddeus throws an arm around my shoulder and says, "He's cool. You mess with CMXI, you mess with me." The teenagers dispersed and Thaddeus made sure I was okay before sending me on my way. I was a bit shaken up at the time, so it wasn't until I reflected later that I realized that Thaddeus and all the other older guys were pretty obviously strapped, and their status saved me from any trouble for the remainder of my time in high school. Story 4. Old biker came from Wisconsin to my dad's funeral to give me a necklace my dad had him fix for me, which I had since I was a child. My dad has been a biker since I was about 17. He loved riding on his BMW and was always tinkering with one of them in the garage. While he never joined a gang, he was friendly enough to them when they came around to his local bar or when he saw them while on a ride with his buddies. Dad went on cross-country trips, mainly ending up in Wisconsin to visit friends. Fast forward to this past Christmas, my dad died on the 23rd and we were having his funeral. Mom insisted on having him looking proper, though I was holding on to his biker vest. A bunch of bikers came in, a significant number from a gang, I was later told. Many rode in the Ohio cold on their bikes in his memory. One in particular came from Wisconsin just to give me a necklace Dad left him to fix up for me. I've had this necklace since I was a small child and Dad bought it for me. It broke when I was 14 and I hadn't seen it until he brought it back to me, fixed up. Story 5. My mom went out to some fine dining with some Crip members. I didn't see this personally, but about 20 years ago, my mother was a 5th grade teacher in Compton. For those of you who don't know, Compton is pretty notorious when it comes to its concentration of gangs and gang violence, especially in the immigrant district, which is where she lived and taught. It was a pretty average night if you heard between 1 or 10 gunshots. My mom, being the freaking boss that she is, refused to leave the district or teach anywhere else. Anyways, in her first year teaching there, she had a group of about 5 boys, all of them living in destitute poverty. During the break, they loved to draw pictures of cars like Lamborghinis and Porsches, all things that they could never afford. They all promised my mom that if they ever got a car, she would be the first person that they would take for a ride. Skipping ahead about 8 years, my mom was leaving the school late after staying to grade some tests. As she was walking to her car, she saw a shady group of boys leaning against a car watching her. She began to walk fast, but the boys caught up and began walking towards her. All of them were wearing the telltale blue bandanas, or Crips, and my mom said she could see one who was packing a Saturday night special. Anyways, just as she got to her car door, the group of boys reached her. One of them spoke in a deep, intimidating voice. "Missus, we're here to take you for a ride." My mom thought she was being kidnapped and reached for her pepper spray. Then another of the group stepped forward and introduced themselves as the 5 boys that she taught about 8 years ago. They squeezed my mom into the back seat of an old beat-up Cadillac between 2 of the students. They took her to a really fancy restaurant somewhere and paid for her meal in full. Later, they took her back to her car, dropped her off, and told her if she ever needed anything to call them, then drove off. Story 6. 25 years ago, I was a door-to-door encyclopedia salesman. It's on the 4th of July. I'm in Cleveland, Mentor on the Lake to be precise. The boss is pissed because the crew wasn't selling crap, so he makes us work on the 4th of July. I get dropped in a neighborhood about 3 blocks from the lake and I start knocking on doors. I'm working my way down the street, knocking on doors, nobody home mostly, and then I turn the corner and I can see where everyone is. Big house with a huge backyard and nothing but Harleys, probably 25 to 50 of them, lined up, and it's this whole cookout, roast pig thing happening. Now, in hindsight, the whole scene was pretty chill. The wives and kids are all there, no gunfire or knife play in sight. Just the same, there's no way in hell I am knocking on this door, and I'm doing my best to walk by and be invisible. Wasn't happening. "Hey, you!" Of course, it's the biggest barrel-chested dude in leather I've ever seen in my life. He looked like he could throw a damn Harley at me. Hell, he looked like he just got done eating a Harley and he's looking right at me. Me? "Yeah, you. Come. Here." "Are you sure you mean me? I'm looking all around behind me. The street is empty." "Boy, don't you make me come over this fence. Get the hell over here." "Okay, so why walk over?" "Hi. What the hell are you doing in my neighborhood?" "Okay, now I think I just peed myself a little. I'm like a door-to-door salesman, you know?" "No crap, Mr. Slacks and shirt and tie with a frickin' backpack walking around my neighborhood. What the hell are you selling?" Encyclopedias, kids' books, sir." "Really?" Yes, sir." And I open my bag and haul out a book and hand it to him. He takes it and he's flipping through the pages and now he's talking to me, real conversational like. "You see all these wives sitting out here with all the Rugrats running around now, don't you?" Yes, sir." "And you were just going to walk on by?" Yes, sir." "You weren't going to knock on our door?" "Nope, no, sir." "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir." "Positive?" "Yes, sir." "Well, why the hell not?" Cue growls from assorted pit bulls and Rottweilers who had suddenly showed up because the word was out. "Come see what crap your pants fear smells like." Okay, so now I'm freaking positive. I pissed myself. He snaps the book shut. I'm just messing with you, dude. And with that, he hollers over his shoulder, hey, anyone want to buy some frickin' encyclopedia and kids and books and crap? And from the circle of wives, a voice spoke up, what you got? And the dude turns back and says, see that? You're in. Jump the fence, dude. 10 seconds later, I have a chair and a beer and a dozen bikers' wives all leaning forward to see what I've got. What makes the story even better is that I did actually write a deal and then they wouldn't let me leave until my boss showed up to pick me up. And the roast pig? Damn, that was amazing. They fed me and fed me some more and everyone said goodbye when I left. No kidding. Nicest people ever. Story 7. Well, this isn't a gang, but certainly a story about a badass thug. Where I went to school was pretty middle-class white. However, there was one part of town that was kind of rough as it butted up against a rougher town right next to us. There was a kid that went to my school that was a senior when I was a sophomore. He was honestly probably the biggest badass in my school. He was about 6'2", 240 pounds. He was all muscle, and in high school, he already had a body filled up with prison-style tattoos. I know he had spent some time in juvie. One day, from a distance, I saw some other typical white thug kids kind of taunting a kid with obvious mental handicap issues. I couldn't quite tell what was going on, though. A few seconds later, I see the actual only badass I went to high school with come over and grab one of the guys. I hear him tell the kid to go pick up his frickin' cars. The kids kind of scramble, and I see they're picking up Hot Wheels all over the locker bay. He then makes the kids apologize to the handicapped kid. They had been kicking his Hot Wheels around the locker bay while he tried to play with them. The mean kids leave and I see the badass guy start talking to the kid about Hot Wheel cars. The rest of the school year, the badass kid would bring Hot Wheels in for the handicapped kid. They would trade Hot Wheels, talk about Hot Wheels, buy each other Hot Wheels, and even play with the Hot Wheels on the lunch tables. He spent so much time hanging out with this kid and his Hot Wheels. It was one of the most badass things I've ever seen. Story 8. My cousin's stepbrother, a gang affiliate in Sweden, saved a police officer's life instead of escaping. So in Stockholm, Sweden in 2007, a task force of highly trained officers from the Swedish military police was tasked with hunting down and incarcerating any and all known members of the Werewolf Legion, a gang responsible for most of the cocaine and cat trafficking in Sweden and Finland. My cousin Andres was an affiliate of theirs at the time, operating a rather large marijuana grow op in Berlin, Germany. Within a span of 8 months, 16 known affiliates to the WL were imprisoned in Sweden on charges of drug trafficking, extortion, or murder, including Andres' stepbrother Johan. Johan was being transported to a holding facility in Halmstad, and on the way, the police caravan was attacked by gang associates, believed to be part of the Ukrainian mafia. 3 officers were killed in the attack, and 1 was shot in the throat. Instead of running while he had the chance, Johan ripped off his shirt and applied pressure to the wound on the officer's neck with it. He waited with the officer, bleeding profusely from his throat until the paramedics and police arrived. He was later pardoned for his crimes, which were listed as 2 counts of trafficking, as well as an outstanding warrant for an assault 2 years prior in a bar in Oslo, Norway. Story 9. Oh, another one. So I was 19 and stranded in North Miami. I had just locked up my keys on my car in a rather unpopulated and shady area. Was a blonde, blue-eyed, extremely white girl, and being as I had not intended to stop in North Miami to begin with, I was just wearing a bikini top and a miniskirt. There was a gang of Hispanic youth in the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse across the street from me, just watching me. This was a long before cell phones and such, so I took a chance and just put on my most confident face and walked over to them and asked if anyone knew how to break into a car and if they could help me. They all looked at each other for a second. You could tell they were thinking over all the possibilities. Then one of them shook his head and just walked over to my car, popped my lock with his pocket knife and a piece of wire he found on the ground. Story 10. Suburban couple stops in a bar on the way to go camping to see a football game, finds out it's a very friendly biker bar belonging to the Outlaws, goes back twice a year to say hello and have beers. My husband and I tow our camper from Florida to Tennessee twice a year to camp in the Smokies. A good stopping point is an area called Locust Grove, Georgia. There's a cute overnight RV park close to I-75, and also the most kick-ass Mexican restaurant you'd ever guess was in a strip mall where we like to grab a bite and drink. So one night, we got in a little late and were finishing up dinner and watching the debut of Favre playing for the Jets on TV at the Mexican place. The game went to the half and the restaurant was closing up. We asked the waiter if he knew of any place we could catch the second half, and he pointed us to some bar across the interstate. So off we go to a little nondescript place named The Grove, seated in front of your typical interstate motel. There were just a handful of cars in the lot, but it still looked open, so we headed in. The waiter was right. They were showing the game on a big TV, so we grabbed some stools and ordered some beers. I get kind of loud watching football, especially if I've had a few, so I let out a few hoots and hollers and the waitress heads over to see if we want another round. I feel dumb at this point because I'm in a strange bar with locals being sort of loud, so I apologize to the waitress. She replies in the heaviest, sweetest Georgian drawl, "Baby, you're in a biker bar, you be as noisy as you want," and then went off to get our beers. That's when we took a good look around and our dumbass realized we were in a real-life biker bar, like hardcore. We notice a poker game in the back room, we see the biker flags hanging, and we see the bikers at the bar in the shadows. Biker, bar, big time. But also a good football game, cold beers, and what feels to be a fairly non-threatening laid-back environment. So we stay, late, like really late, and we get to know Kat, the bartender, and others seated at the bar who are all super nice. We got invited back anytime during our travels. In fact, we learned many truckers stay in the parking lot of the Grove because it's convenient and they serve food. Kat told us we could park our rig there anytime, which killed us. Our camper was now a rig, and to just call ahead and she'd have a hot meal waiting. She also said it's safer than the RV park because it's a biker bar and no one will let you get messed with if you're our guest. So we now hit the Grove every time we pass through on I-75 if we can. We learned in later visits that the gang whose bar that is are the Outlaws. They seem very nice, in fact, and the last time we were there, they were hosting a charity event, a chili cook-off, I think, for kids. Story 11. Walking through a bad neighborhood in Managua, got saved by gang members. I was visiting Central America a few years back and decided that it was a good idea to go into the projects in Managua. Just to paint a mental picture here, most of the houses that could actually be called houses were surrounded by brick and razor wire, and the rest were slapdash structures of sheet metal and anything else that could be found. It wasn't the nicest of places, to be sure. Anyways, I figured that it would be cool for 4 reasons. A, I'm actually a little darker than many of the locals despite my blue eyes and Eastern European heritage. B, I speak pretty good Spanish. C, I had a Salvadorian friend with me. And D, I was, at the time, the most badass freak around, or so I thought. So Marcos, my Salvadorian friend, and I were walking through Camilo Ortega past a park when we see a brawl break out in the park at the end of the street. All of a sudden, we hear a bang bang, a gun firing in the mass of bodies, and they just scatter with the shooter still popping off shots as they ran. Marcos and I were as confused as we were scared, not knowing the neighborhood, but 2 of the guys from the brawl stepped out from between 2 of the ramshackle houses to our left and basically dragged us in with them. At this point, I was certain I was a dead man, but they just told us to lay low with them and they would get us out of there. They didn't ever actually identify themselves, but Marcos, who grew up surrounded by gang activity, told me he was almost certain they were M18, Mara 18. So there we were in a hut sitting with gang members, praying we weren't about to get killed. It was a strange experience. They stayed true to their word, though, and got us out of Ortega. Needless to say, I felt slightly less badass after that. Story 12. When I was in high school, I went on a double date to go see a movie. Don't remember which one, and when we came out of the theater, we realized my friend who drove had locked his keys in the car. We spent an hour or so asking and begging the cops that we saw in the parking lot to unlock the car for us, and every one of them turned us down. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, this gentleman appears, sees us looking in the window of our car, and asks if he can help us. We explain the situation, he says he can help, and within 15 seconds, our car is unlocked. Being amazed high schoolers, we just stared in awe what had happened, then he leaves us with these parting words. Today is my first day out of prison. I was in for a grand theft auto, and off he walked. Story 13. 2 good encounters with bikies. The father of a schoolmate was an angel, despite being an enormous, scary, hairy bear of a man who was constantly covered in leather and stunk of oil and beer. He was a great guy. He always looked after his kids and their friends. When one of my friends got lost on the local moorland, he got some mates on buggies to go find him. The second one was more recently. I ride a crappy little 50cc scooter and was in the front of a bunch of cars trying to change lanes so I could turn off the major road I was in after a light change. 2 bikies, not sure which gang there are, a ton of locals, saw me struggling with some creep in a 4x4 not getting ahead or falling back so I could change lanes. These 2 bikies swung in front of him and forced an entire lane to slow down, then waved me in. Story 14. When I was 15, someone slipped acid in my soda at a bar. My stepdad played in a skeezy Southern rock cover band, so I spent a lot of times in bars with my parents, helping my mom run the soundboard. I don't remember much about what happened, but at some point, a group of ghostwriters gathered around me as I was in a corner, rocking back and forth and carrying me out to a car and taking me home. They made me tea and brought me crackers and basically talked me through it until dawn. My parents stayed at the bar and worked. They just let these bikers take me home and take care of me. 2 of them were convicted felons with violent offenses who had done many years in prison. Story 15. My biological father was a bandito and was kind enough to beg my mom so that I could be given the gift of life. Heart of gold, that one.